Imagine you are ordered to step on the face of God, a bronze tile, a face, and a soldier watching your feet. If you step, you live. If you don't, you already know what happens. This was the fumi, the picture stepping. And every single year, in every village across Japan, families lined up to do it. Men, women, children, 1 foot forward, eyes down, and somewhere in the back of the crowd, some of them were praying while they did it. This is the story of the Kakure Kirishitan, the hidden Christians. And for 250 years, they pulled off something history has almost no parallel for. They kept a religion alive entirely inside their own minds, with no church, no priest, no Bible, no institution. Just memory, just whispers, just an unbroken chain of human beings who refused to forget. To understand why they had to hide, you have to understand what they were hiding from. By the early 1600s, Christianity had been spreading through Japan for nearly 80 years. Jesuit missionaries had arrived in 1549, and at the movement's peak, somewhere between 300,000 and 750,000 Japanese had converted. Entire feudal lords, villages, coastlines. The faith had sunk roots deep into the southwestern island of Kyushu. Then the Tokugawa shogunate decided it had to die. The ban came in stages, 1587, 1597, 1614, escalating in brutality each time. Christians were crucified on hillside crosses outside Nagasaki, positioned so the sea could watch. They were boiled alive in the sulfur springs of Unzen. They were suspended upside down over pits until they renounced or bled out. The shogunate called it Anaguma, the pit, slow, designed to break the mind before the body. Then came 1637, Shimabara, a peninsula south of Nagasaki, mostly Catholic converts and starving peasants ground beneath impossible tax burdens. 37,000 of them, men, women, children, barricaded themselves inside the ruins of Hara Castle and held off the Tokugawa army for nearly 4 months. When the walls finally fell in April 1638, the shogunate executed almost every one of them. 37,000 people. The bodies were piled outside the castle. For the Tokugawa government, Shimabara was the proof they needed. Christianity wasn't just a foreign religion. It was a threat to order itself. The crackdown that followed wasn't persecution. It was extermination policy. The fumi became annual ritual. Informant networks spread through every village. The government introduced taraka, a system where every Japanese family had to register at a Buddhist temple, proving they were not Christian. And if you were found to be hiding your faith, you weren't just executed. Your neighbors were watched. Your family was investigated. The social cost of sheltering a believer was engineered to be catastrophic, so they disappeared. The communities that survived did so by becoming invisible. They moved to the most remote coastlines of Nagasaki Prefecture, the Goto Islands, the Sotome Coast, the Urakami Valley. Fishing villages at the edge of the known world. Places where a government inspector might come once a decade. And there, they built a shadow religion. Every element of the faith was camouflaged. The Virgin Mary became Canon, the Buddhist goddess of mercy. Her statues looked identical, and a hidden cross was sometimes pressed into the base, invisible unless you knew to look. Prayers were chanted in a phonetic Japanese that had drifted so far from their original Portuguese and Latin that even the people saying them no longer understood the words. They were memorizing sound, not meaning. The rhythm carried the faith when the language couldn't. They called their prayers oratio, from the Latin oratio. But the words had mutated across 2 centuries of oral transmission into something entirely their own. Scholars who later examined these prayers found traces of the Pater Noster, the Ave Maria, the salve regina, buried inside strings of syllables that had transformed like a message passed through 1,000 hands. Their sacred objects were hidden inside ordinary household items. Rosaries concealed inside Buddhist prayer beads, crucifixes pressed inside lacquer boxes, a Madonna carved small enough to fit inside a hollow gourd. These objects were passed from parent to eldest child, never shown, rarely spoken of directly, handed down with the silent weight of a secret too important and too dangerous to name out loud. And they had a calendar, not written, memorized. Feast days folded into the rhythm of fishing seasons and planting cycles, so that celebrating a saint's day looked to any outsider like ordinary agricultural tradition. They had baptism, their own version, performed by lay people, usually the chokata, a kind of community ritual keeper who held the most sacred knowledge. No ordination, no seminary, just a role passed down through families carrying the accumulated liturgical memory of generations. For over 250 years this held. No priest, no church, no outside contact, just the community, the memory, and the object in the hollow gourd. March 17, 1865. Ora Cathedral, Nagasaki. A newly built Catholic church, one of the first in Japan since the ban, stands open, its Gothic spires jarring against the skyline. A small group of villagers from Urakami approaches the French missionary Father Bernard Petitjean. They're cautious. They're watching. Then, one woman steps forward and speaks quietly. She says, "The heart of all of us here is the same as yours." Petitjean is stunned. He asks if they have a statue of Santa Maria. They say yes. He asks if they've been passing down their faith for generations. They say yes. And then they tell him something that stops him completely. That they have been waiting. That their ancestors told them that one day priests would come from Rome, that they would be celibate, that they would answer to a man in the West. And they came to see if it was true. 250 years, and they were still checking for the prophecy. The news traveled to Rome in weeks. The Vatican called it the providential discovery, the greatest miracle of the modern Catholic Church. Hidden Christians, preserved like a message in a bottle, had just washed back onto shore. But the reunion was not simple. When missionaries finally reached the hidden communities and began teaching, something became clear. The faith that had survived wasn't quite Catholicism anymore. The prayers were unrecognizable. The rituals had absorbed Buddhist elements, Shinto elements, folk beliefs about local spirits. The theology had drifted, and for many Kakure Kirishitan, what the priests were offering, Roman doctrine, Latin mass, hierarchical authority, felt foreign, like someone had handed them a stranger's version of their grandmother's recipe. When the Meiji government formally lifted the ban on Christianity in 1873, most hidden Christians returned to the Catholic Church, but not all. Some kept the ancestral version, their version, the one that had cost everything to preserve. Their descendants still exist. On the Goto Islands, in the Sotome Coast villages, small communities still perform the Ora show, still memorize prayers whose words they don't fully understand, still treat the sound itself as sacred. Here is the thing about the Kakure Kirishitan that no history textbook quite prepares you for. They didn't just survive, they transformed, and they chose the transformation. When the priests came back and told them they'd been doing it wrong, that the prayers had drifted, that the theology had shifted, that they needed to return to orthodoxy, many of them said, gently, no. Because what they had wasn't a corrupted version of the real thing. It was the real thing. It was the thing their great-great-grandparents had given their lives to protect. The form had changed. The soul hadn't. That's the question at the center of this story, and it has no clean answer. How much can a belief, or a culture, or an identity change before it becomes something else? How many mutations can a message absorb across 250 years of isolation and still mean what it meant at the beginning? The Kakure Kirishitan didn't preserve Christianity. They preserved the commitment to preserving it. And maybe, across that much time, that's the same thing. We talk about faith as something handed down. But the real miracle here isn't the faith. It's the people who kept deciding, generation after generation, in secret, in danger, in silence, that it was worth remembering. What would you be willing to carry that long?